that building of, what is the society we want to see? What are the communities we want to see? Through that work and visioning that together, we can start to push back and we can tear down those pillars that are holding up the folks that want to harm our students and our communities.
Peace, everyone. My name is Moira Kaleida, Executive Director of Communities for Just Schools Fund, and this is our podcast, Beyond the Bell. Our podcast is committed to bringing you the voices, dreams, and brilliance of community organizers activating the public will for education justice. Together, we will learn about how to support building a world where youth, caregivers, and educators are holistically safe, thriving, cared for, and invested in. We know that our communities deserve to feel dignified and safe, irrespective of their race, economic status, zip code, gender, and ability. Unfortunately, today's public schools in our communities are not yet safest places to grow and live for the majority of Black, Brown, Indigenous, trans, queer, two-spirit, disabled, or undocumented youth. Yet, organizers around the country are working hard to build these types of supportive communities. But how do they get there? Today's conversation is filled with brilliant organizers from across the Communities for Just Schools Fund partner network. They are doing the critical work to ensure that youth are safe and supported in schools and communities. We will dive deep into their hopes, dreams, victories, and collective wisdom that all organizers possess as they teach us about how to build a world where young people are resourced and not criminalized. And a little bit about today's episode. You're about to hear about the impact of federal funding cuts, privatization, and overall attacks on public education. Across the country, parents, families, educators, and community-based organizations have begun to organize and push back. In fact, have been organizing and pushing back against the proliferation of charter schools, school closings, and other drastic reforms that are disproportionately affecting our communities. Organizers are elevating the intersection between access to safe and supportive schools and neighborhoods where youth, families, teachers, and workers enjoy a better quality of life. On today's show, we'll hear from Moira Kaleida and Kyle Serette. They are advocating for a quality of life agenda, an end to the privatization and school closures, the repeal of policies that erode the civil rights of young people, their families, and their educators. Our first guest is Moira Kaleida, the National Coalition Director at the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, or AROS. AROS is a coalition of education justice organizers and labor union locals working together to protect and transform public education. Moira has served on the Pittsburgh Public School Board, was a chief of staff for a city council member and state representative in Pennsylvania, and was a former organizer with 412 Justice in Pennsylvania, who fights for the rights of Black, Brown, LGBTQ, and youth with disabilities. Moira, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Our next guest is Kyle Serette, the board chair of the Schott Foundation for Public Education and the national campaign manager for the National Education Association. Kyle is also one of the co-founders of Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. Kyle is a former chemistry teacher, which I did not know, and he's organized nurses, hospitals, and airport workers in his career. The NEA is currently the largest labor union in the United States, primarily representing teachers with over 3 million members and affiliates in every single state across the nation, across 14,000 communities. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Manuel. Awesome. Glad to be on this podcast.
We're so happy you both are here. You all are some of the most brilliant leaders I have met throughout the CJSF Partner Network. We just want to start giving our audience a chance to get to know you a little bit. So, Moira, what life experiences brought you to organizing for education justice, and what's giving you hope in this moment?
So I came to this work as a public school grad, as somebody who went through public school, was very devoted to my schools at the time while I was growing up, and started testifying in front of my school board in 7th grade.
You firecracker youth organizer. Yes.
And I went to college and got a degree in education, but really saw the need to go deeper and work within the community. And so now, having been in this work for a while, I've served on the school board, like you said. I also now have 2 public school students of my own and a partner who's a teacher in our school system as well. So very devoted to the movement overall. and really hopeful for what we can do when we bring folks together to organize.
Thank you, Moira. What about you, Kyle? How do you come to this work, and what life experiences brought you to organizing for education justice? And also, truly a question that we're all grappling with. What is giving you hope in this moment?
A great question. I was born into this movement. So both of my parents were organizers and on the more radical side of the organizing spectrum. And there's a story I tell sometimes about in second grade, I came home a little mopey because they wouldn't let us talk at lunchtime anymore. And my parents encouraged me to form an organizing committee of my peers and to do a walk-in on the boss, which was the principal. Eventually, we got to be able to talk at lunchtime again. And so it was a life of growing up on picket lines, whether it was anti-apartheid or had to do with the 7 times my dad got fired from work because he was being a labor leader. But it was also a normal growing up, bike riding to the pool and movie theater and all those good things. But eventually I decided to dedicate my life to this work. And this is after becoming a chemistry teacher, I think this is my 25th year as an organizer in this space. And my purpose is to decrease popular immiseration. So that's just this concept that there's too much poverty, too much misery in this world because of inequality. And so all of us can do it. One methodology is to be a teacher, and you could just do everything you can from that vantage point. Others of us can build coalitions. Others can pass policies. We all have a hand in making society a more loving place. And so for me, the goal has always been, at the largest scale possible, how can I help support communities to use their power to create the changes that we all know are necessary? There's a statistic that should be in everyone's mind every day, that the average person is awake in any given year for 5,500 hours. Well, there's 5,500 hours. And 1,000 of those hours are spent inside of school if you're a student, and 4,500 of those hours are outside of school. And so there's no way for us to improve schools unless we improve communities. And so this whole fallacy that we have, that if we could just create the most perfect schools or the most just, that we get to the society that we want, is just a myth that is honestly to the benefit of billionaires. Because if all you have to do is improve schools, why do you have to even improve communities? So that's why the whole idea of like a school island of excellence doesn't make sense. So for me, being part of the largest union in the country that happens to be an educator union creates the power I feel like should be in the game to make good on this American dream that's been mostly, mythology. But some of us, strong organizers like on this call, can help turn myths into reality.
I love that, Kyle. You said so many things that are so powerful, right? School's not an island separate from community infrastructure. Public schools are essential, embedded infrastructure in community, and that we must work outside and within schools to transform the lives of all of our community members. And so that gets a little bit to like the work that you both do together, right? You're both members of Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. Moira, can you tell me a little bit about Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, or AROS? When it was formed, what was it seeking to address? Who did you bring together? And why is this coalition so important in this moment?
The Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools came about in 2013. And this was at the time when Waiting for Superman and Don't Back Down movies and pop culture was really moving against public education. And we were facing Race to the Top and the effects of No Child Left Behind, right? There was an all-out attack, it felt like, on public schools. And we were seeing school closures happen across the country. And so at that time, leaders like Kyle and Brother G2 Brown from the Journey for Justice Alliance, as well as, Eric Zachary, who was at the AFT at that time, and others gathered to say, like, how do we bring folks together? Because we know that we're stronger when labor and community is working together, and we can win bigger and better things for our schools. And so that's really kind of the formation story. And from there, we moved into the Red for Ed movement. There were teacher strikes across the country that was supported by Eros. And in 2019, we held the first ever presidential forum on education, bringing together all candidates to address questions solely around education. And so it's been a great 12 years of growth, and now really have taken a bigger step into both looking at the federal government and how we can organize together to push back and really actually push forward our vision for what schools should be, as well as still knowing that real organizing happens at the local level and that we need these grassroots partners to continue the work they're doing. And we just want to be a supportive force behind them.
Thank you, Moira. And what you said just reminded me of another podcast I was listening to produced by Jairus Dixon, the Fascism Barometer, right? And she was interviewing Rachel Herzing, where Rachel Herzing defined herself as a prison industrial complex abolitionist, someone who is working to destroy the prison industrial complex in all its forms. And they talked a little bit about like the yin and the yang of organizing, that you fight, you contest for power, and then the opposition, unfortunately, will come back and try to regain whatever you won. And that tug of war, that yin and yang, that interplay, Kyle, we know that community members, young people, teachers, family members, caregivers are in this tug of war for what was originally promised to be a public good, right? The right to a safe, accessible, equitable public education. I don't know if a lot of people often relate labor union struggles to the fight for public education. And so can you tell us a little bit about the NEA, the largest labor union in our nation, which is no small feat? What's the role of workers and labor in the larger fight for education justice? And to Moira's point about Arrows and this broad coalition that was formed, what becomes possible when you bring workers and a worker assessment and evaluative framework to the role of power building for education?
So the big deal here is that the right wing found alignment around attacking public services, education being one of them. And that forced alignment on our side. So one thing led to the other. I don't think Eros would have been born if the right wing had not found alignment to break up the public school monopoly, as they try to think about it, right? And also, NEA has this long history of being so powerful that we don't need anyone else, according to how we used to feel about ourselves. And then all of a sudden we started losing in a bunch of places, like all these voucher laws and other laws that were not favorable to public education started going. And we're like, there's always a breaking point when a powerful force realizes they need friends. And not only fair weather friends that you call when you need them, but true partners that can be in the struggle together with you. And so I think the founding of Eros was the beginning of that process. So even though we have 5,000 staff all across the country and we have 14,000 locals and we are the largest labor union in the country, there's a realization that that's not enough. But the question is it's not enough for what? In the beginning of Eros, it was not enough for each one of us individually to fight off the threats that were happening. So it was a stop that coalition. But the other side had a compelling point. They said that those students deserve better. And we're like, yeah, those students deserve better. We know that. But their answer was 3 words: charter schools, choice, right? And we were giving them this 30-page manual on how to fix society and schools. And one operates slightly better over X. So back then it was Twitter, right? And so I'd say the big deal within NEA and the work that I'm work on every day is to work to transform our locals so that they are fighting high participation locals so that they can live into their power. Because there's this idea in science called potential energy. And we're not always at the highest state. Sometimes we're settled down and we're not at our highest state of energy and potential. And so that takes a catalyst. And sometimes that's funding. So you can hire an organizer to like jerk people from their routines into, a pathway that leads towards change. And so that's something that we can do with our resources is we can support our locals and our communities to hire organizers to build a consensus on their vision for what they want their schools and communities to be, and then go fight for it and get a majority on that school board, get a majority on that city council, get the mayor to be our mayor. And we don't need everyone to be like the smartest city council person or school board person or a mayor. We just need them to do the people's agenda.
Well, two things that came to mind when you were talking is you all are the biggest union in the country, yet how are teachers faring despite the size and footprint? Like, how are teachers actually doing right now?
I mean, I'd say it is a tapestry. So the teachers that have been in wealthy neighborhoods are doing fine, right? Same with those bus drivers. Could it be better? Yes. But the teachers that are in the have-not zip codes are doing poorly. And there's tons of turnover. And their students and communities are doing poorly. And that's the story of America. When you say, like, how are someone doing? It's like, where do you live? And what resources do you have in that community? Is it a loving community? And if it's a loving community, then you have loving schools. And then not that you can't improve on them, but it is better. So I'd say for our members, it's a real mixed bag. But if you sum it all up, it's not going so well. And it hasn't been going well for decades and decades. And that's because we have never done our work inside the United States to create the equity we need in our society. That's like never been done. We've made certain leaps. We did that post the Great Depression. We forced the United States into some social safety net deals. And then post the Great Society with LBJ, we've forced ourselves into other safety net priorities, but it was all just like little things, never the things that the leaders we kind of lift up have always like aspired to. So we inherited something from the last generation of organizers. And the question is for us, what are we leaving behind for those who we're passing baton to? And what I would say is the teachers I'm most inspired by and the educators, because we represent a lot of bus drivers and support professionals, those guys are fighting. They're fighting not only for themselves, they're fighting for their communities and what we call the common good. That to me is the wind at our back, because when people are ready to fight, that's gold.
Yeah, and we need it, right? I really appreciate your beginning to take us to the conversation of like, how are we assessing this political moment and history and legacy that all of our communities are standing on. And so this is the 50th anniversary year of ESEA, this milestone law signed by President Lyndon Johnson in April 1965. That was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And it launched a series of initiatives to close achievement gaps by aiming to provide fair and equal opportunities for the most vulnerable students, including children of color, children in poverty, students with disabilities, and English language learners who are currently facing threats to just their access to public education. And so, Moira, I wanted to kind of hear your take on this political moment. What forces are at play? And is this a new moment? How should youth, caregivers, and educators and workers understand this moment? What are the policies and frameworks driving the attacks on public education?
What time is it? I'd say it's the 1 a.m. It's dark and it's scary out right now, but we're waiting for morning. So right now, what we're seeing is an authoritarian regime and practices that are taking over, not just at this national level, but we're seeing this play out even locally, right? We see how, I think it was Becky Pringle from the NEA that was calling it anticipatory compliance in January, right? Folks that were complying prior to this administration coming in with some of the directives, say in Project 2025. But what we see now is those efforts playing out. And what we need in this moment are champions. And education is nonpartisan, right? We need champions who are going to stand up for their rural areas, for the schools that, there aren't these privatization options, charter schools, voucher schools. We need elected leaders who understand that this is the source of our shared values, right? That we believe that every child born in this country is entitled to public education. Sorry, let me revise that. We agree that every child is entitled to a public
Born
education.
wherever they are.
Yeah, right, wherever they are. So I do think that right now, what is happening and what we need to harness is the rage and the fear that folks are feeling, because that is, as Kyle mentioned, what drives us together sometimes. And through that building of, what is the society we want to see? What are the communities we want to see? Through that work and visioning that together, we can start to push back and we can tear down those pillars that are holding up the folks that want to harm our students and our communities. And so I think that, right now, there's a lot of questions. So as we're recording this, we just got the text yesterday from the new appropriations bill for education. And we're reviewing that right now to look at, what are the effects that this is going to have moving forward if it would pass through the budget. So right now, I think we just need to be strong and looking for the best ways that we can partner together to fight for the common good, to fight for the communities we all deserve, for the schools we deserve, and for the world we deserve.
Right on, Moira. And then just to be able to actually support our audience members who might not be all in the know or actively yet engaged, can you break down a little bit about what was in the federal appropriations bill? What is causing fear and distress in communities around some of the policies that are moving?
So we just came out of reconciliation for this past year, and in that was the very first federal private school voucher tax credit that is going to move forward in 2027. As originally proposed, that tax credit would have been $5 billion a year. It would have been unlimited. You could have donated stocks. Folks like Betsy DeVos and Jeffrey Yass, billionaires, could donate up to 10% of their income to scholarship granting organizations. Through the work of the Eros Coalition and our partners across the 12 organizations, we worked hard to fight back and push back on that bill, finding champions in Congress and locally who could come and speak. We had students and faith leaders coming into Washington, D.C. to talk with legislators about how harmful that would be. And in the end, it came out as a $1,700 tax credit from unlimited 10%. You can no longer donate stocks. Businesses can no longer donate. And there was real change made, right? So that was just one piece. But what we worry about is that voucher expansion, because we know that if there's any waste, fraud, and abuse, it's in vouchers. And we've seen that play out in Florida, Arizona, and other states that have this type of voucher. There was then a threat of rescissions of almost $7 billion that the administration was trying to hold back. We also activated around that, and so did many of our partners, and those funds were just released last Friday. There's still a threat, right? There's still a chance that there can be more rescissions from this budget alone before we even get into, we just began the appropriations process. So right now it's going to just be a test of where it goes. The bill that came out yesterday was not nearly as bad as expected, but leaves a lot to be desired as well. But yeah, so we just want to make sure that the programs you mentioned, like Title I, like IDEA, remain protected and funded. And actually, we want to increase that funding. We've worked for many years at Eros to support the Keep Our Pact Act and the fully funding IDEA Act. And we'll continue that work because we do believe that those sources are dollars that were never promised that could be life-changing for our students.
And can you break down really quickly, Moira, what is Title I and IDA? And then also, why do we not want billionaires to donate to schools? What are the harms of opening up a whole infrastructure of billionaire donations that prop up a charter school or private school system? And how does that affect the public school funding in local communities?
So Title I is a program that was initiated in 1965 that was around providing an additional 40% of funding for students in high poverty areas. And that can be support in reading intervention. It could support paraprofessionals in the classroom. It could support curriculum, any of these things that can really help to advance these students in those areas. And that funds a lot of our schools, not just urban schools, but also our rural schools. Same thing applies. IDEA came about 10 years later in 1975. This is the guarantee to free and appropriate education for students with disabilities. This was also supposed to be additional funding for each student to help support assistive technology, speech-language pathologist, a counselor, whatever is needed, that again, the federal government has never fulfilled the promise on, only providing around 16% of the promised dollars. So that alone has been a major wedge in the funding issues that we have when we talk about how we fund our schools. The way that we know it does not work to fund our schools is billionaires propping them up. In fact, we just saw the Chan Zuckerberg charter school close last month. So, for years, billionaires have thought that they have the right idea that's going to fix public education, but they don't actually want to invest in public education. They want to invest in, again, these charter schools, vouchers, ways that they can figure out how to create more of a money source. With charter schools, it's real estate schemes, right? With vouchers, it's usually ed tech. But there's some way to set up a stream of money-making schemes through these charter school donations, especially these large ones. It's also been extremely harmful as the practices that they've promoted are not research-based, are not evidence-based, and are solely billionaire ideas and not peer-reviewed research. So the harm that has happened by folks like Bill Gates, like Zuckerberg, like Reed Hastings has been extremely harmful in our public system because attempting to set up a second system, another system of education. So instead of investing all our dollars in one and being able to provide all the resources to all kids, we're investing in a system that we know doesn't allow in or continues to kick out students with disabilities, students with that are English language learners, and students that have behaviors that they just don't like. So yeah, I think that covers it, but Kyle might have some interesting input here.
I appreciate that. And, this whole idea of blaming public schools and calling them failures for our children when they were never adequately invested in the first place is part of this larger narrative you mentioned earlier, Kyle, around how do we convince the American public that public institutions do not work, that they must all be privatized, that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. And, the data shows that the vouchers have been primarily used by families that were already wealthy, were already sending their kids to private schools, that they're absolutely detrimental to children in rural areas where there are less infrastructure for private or charter. And so that means less access. That means farther travel times to a school. And then broadly, when they're a charter, they don't have access to federally funded dollars. And so if 47% of our nation's children live in rural areas, there's no one description of a rural area. There's rural areas in every single state across our country. And the majority of our children in rural communities are getting their healthcare through Medicaid. They're getting food support through SNAP. And once you privatize, those federal dollars are being rerouted into private infrastructure that we know has never been equitably distributed across the country. So I appreciate you, Moira, breaking that down, and do want to hear a little bit from Kyle, right? Like we talked about the forces at play, and Moira talked a little bit about the federal policies on the horizon. I kind of want to hear a little bit from you, Kyle, like your broad scale assessment of this moment. And why should people care? Why should they get involved? What's at stake for their broader quality of life and this quality of life agenda that you guys are promoting?
So the big thing that we all have to realize is it's so much easier to tear something down to build something up. So all of us, there's broad alignment across the whole country, across all political spectrums, that public schools need to be fully remodeled to achieve its vision for society that we want. It's just that the right-wing agenda is to tear down the public school system and it's a privatized system like we see in New Orleans and some other cities that we've seen. And that just doesn't work. And I think in the United States, there is this idea of a common good. We do have a fire department. We do have public libraries and buses, things that we all use. The roads are maintained by a city. We need things together as a society. And one of those things that we need is education. It's just that it's one of those things that we haven't adequately funded. And the thing that you just have to be mad about is the fact that there's so many school districts that they're inadequately funded, even if they're in a wealthy area. But then there's these public school foundations for their district that the PTA is funded with hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So there's just all these have nots in our current public school system. It's just that there's a solution that we were missing on our side. And I think we made a big leap when we decided that community schools was going to be one of the big priorities within the Alliance Reclaim Our Schools and more broadly, because the community school model recognizes that you have to remodel schools and communities. And so in community schools, there's this one great one down in Florida that the school became a community school. In Florida, they rate their schools A through F, and it was this F-rated school. Not that we think or anyone thinks that's a good idea to do.
What's a community school? Break it down for our audience versus another kind of school.
Yeah, so a community school is somewhat unfortunately named, but I will tell you what it is. It's a normal public school that hires someone called a community school coordinator. I would call them an organizer. And they build teams of students, school staff, families, and community. And they spend a year asking a supermajority, 75% or more, asking them what their vision is for their school and also what some of the problems are in their school and in their community. And then once they get to that supermajority, then they say, okay, it looks like we have 5 major priorities. And then they ask them what the solutions are. Those who are closest to the pain are closest to the solution. It's a really simple strategy. You hire someone, you talk to everybody, they talk to each other, and then they come up with their solutions. It's just that we don't do it.
And that makes good on the promise that schools are design-led in the vision of the local community that uses them, which is a really, talk about a shining example of democracy in practice, right? In this country where we say we believe in a racial, feminist, diverse democracy, the practices around infrastructure. How do you actually implement a container, a process where people say what they want, and it's the public will that governs how it's designed, how the budget's used, what the school focuses on. And that could be so transformative, considering 84% of young people in our nation attend public schools. And so that is the closest democratic practice where people get to govern themselves. It's through the public school system. It's through school boards, closest to home. And so I was just wanted to kind of put that in context for our friends on why schools really are the closest example of democracy in action.
I think that's right on. So imagine this idea that all you have to do is bring on this organizer, community school coordinator, and their whole job every single day is to empower others to talk to others, who talk to others, who then come together to form these solutions. And they come up with things that we wouldn't even imagine were possible. So that school I was mentioning in Florida, they had this big problem with students just coming to school late or not at all. After years of this is happening, and they just accepted it, that's what is happening in our community. They did that process I already outlined, and they were able to raise their achievement in math and reading and lots of other subjects by installing 20 streetlights and sidewalks. So in public schools, there's this thing every single year they try to figure out how to improve academics. You never see streetlights on the list, right? It's how can we get another manual? Can we get another maybe we can extend the amount of teaching time we have. The streetlights doesn't make the list, but when you're a community school, it does. Because when they talked to those families, they said, I'm not going to send my kids to school in the dark. And there aren't enough streetlights. So then they worked with the city to put some streetlights in. And it's unsafe on this road. We don't have sidewalks. So they put sidewalks in. And sometimes the solutions are right there. It's just you have to talk to the people to make them happen. And so multiply that times the 99,000 public schools we have in this country, in the 14,000 school districts, and you see what's possible. You see that students who were born in a zip code, who were destined for not to be able to achieve their dreams, to see that shift because maybe streetlights allowed them to go to school because their parents thought it was safe for them now. And then they were able to achieve the dreams that they want to do. So to me, like, that story is important, but there's a bigger story at play. It's a power. It took a coalition of students and community, labor and community to win community schools in that district. Oftentimes, we make the mistake of cheering for when we get our candidate elected or when we get our policy passed. And for folks who are marathon runners, which I am not, but I happen to know that it's 26.2 miles. And passing the policy or getting the elected official passed is the 0.2 of the struggle. The rest of the 26, and it's a lifelong race, is continuing to build power to making sure the policies are implemented the way that we want them to be. Because I just painted a great picture of community schools, but 70% of community schools that we've researched at the NEA don't achieve a thing. So it's how they're implemented, how they do their work that matters. Because we all know that they're like good cars and bad cars and good this and bad that, right? So we have to exercise our power to win the things that we want. Community schools is one of them, but like paid sick days should be one of those things. Raising the minimum wage, making it so housing is affordable. All of those things improve schools, and people will vote for their interests. We proved that in Missouri, didn't we? Missouri raised the minimum wage. They got paid sick days. They got abortion access back. They did all those things, and it's a deeply red place. So
that's the roadmap. And, organized people means organized power that can be flexed across time, so that maybe in Florida, the first assessment was safety means a safe lit path to school. And then safety means a transformation of school climate and school culture within. And so, Moira, I wonder if you could point us to victories, right? This is a time where we're being told that those in power do not hold our best interests at heart. I went to bed really happy last Friday. We're recording this on early August. But at the end of Friday, the last week in July, we heard that they finally released the billions of federal dollars that were meant to go literally for summer school activities and for the new school year. And schools were scrambling to figure out, how are we going to fill the gap on budgets for school lunches? How are we going to pay teachers? And literally that is the message we're sending our children and our educators and our family members, that their well-being and his safety doesn't matter when we say we're withholding, we're starving, literally starving systems. But organizing wins and constantly pushes back. Can you tell us a story more of an organizer victory from within the Eros Network or your coalition members that you think can really be a transformative model moving forward?
Yeah, I will just share one that, really moved me this year, which was in Tennessee. The legislators there were attempting to pass a law that would have essentially overridden the right of students to attend school for free, particularly targeting immigrant students around the birthright citizenship fight, right? And down there, the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Coalition worked with partners on the ground, over 50 organizations. And I think it's actually over 70 by the time it got through to the end. But to really activate their community in the protection of these students. And so we saw everything from students who walked up in the middle of a legislative session and knelt with a sign about "stop hurting her friends," to students that were giving testimony and community members who showed up in droves to protest and fight back. And they won that battle. And it was so inspiring because Arrow's partners like the Alliance for Educational Justice were able to come in as experienced organizers and help to shepherd the actions and work together to resource what was needed on the ground. And partners could play all different roles, including, SOCM, one of our wonderful organizations in Tennessee. But what they did was build power in that moment, but they're going to keep that going and they're going to build more because they know that fight is coming again next year, right? So how do we keep sustaining that power and building on that? And that's through growing our coalition. It's through tapping into areas that might not normally be tapped. We've done a lot of work around, how do we dive into some of these really deeper rural areas this year? Because we know, again, public education is nonpartisan. You can live in the reddest place. You can live in the bluest place. Some of our biggest threats to public education are actually in those bluest places. So I think that the more that we can continue to talk about our shared value of educating all kids for the opportunities they deserve, that we can start to build or continue to build those coalitions to fight back against this threat against FLILR or threat against students, threat against teachers, threat against paraprofessionals.
Thank you, Moira. And, just celebrating that Tennessee victory and reminding all of us that when we organize, we do win, and we are seeing change. A recent Gallup poll noted that there's a record high 79% of Americans actually consider immigration good for our country. That is more than the majority. A year ago, 55% of people reported that they wanted immigration decreased. This year, that has gone down to 30%. So the needle is moving and organizing is working. And people have a general sense that all children deserve high quality, equitable public education, and that all people have basic rights that really define who we are as a nation. And we have a lot of work to do to make sure that promise is fulfilled. And so to end on a quick call to action, y'all, how can communities plug in and support the fight for public education, the fight for workers and the dignity that they deserve? What's one action that our listeners can take?
Well, there's something amazing that happened recently. A lot of the partners within the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools joined with a bunch of other sectors. And this year, they launched this campaign, Workers Over Billionaires. And it was launched on May Day, May 1st of this year. And it made it the largest May Day in the history. And so a simple thing to do is to plug into that movement. MaydayStrong.org is a great place to go. Also go to the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools website. There's a great ways to plug in there because you can't just support it just by yourself. We have to have action in these times. And so join an action, but join an action that fights for something, not just against.
Thank you, Kyle. Moira?
Yeah, we've been holding monthly calls with our partners at Center for Popular Democracy. So those are listed on the MaydayStrong.org website, but you can also check out current actions. Right now we have a click to call and a click to email. If you check out our socials, reclaim our SCHLS schools with no O's. And our website is reclaimourschools.org. And then just continue to organize locally and stay rooted in the fact that our work is based and really deeply rooted in the racial justice movement and the work that has happened, and to never give up on that, and not to, you don't have to sacrifice your core beliefs in order to move this work forward.
Thank you, Moira, Kyle. As fellow parents, we will love our children and fight for them to the end. And so thank you so much for joining us. That was Moira Kaleida from Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, or ARROS, and Kyle Serette from the National Education Association, or the NEA. Since recording our podcast, ARROS shared that on November 18th, the federal government took enormous steps towards dismantling the education department. including transferring management and oversight of K-12 public education and its $28 billion budget line to the Department of Labor, alongside $20 billion in special education funding for schools to the Department of Health and Human Services. ARROS and NEA are sounding the alarm about one of the most aggressive and transformative shifts facing the public education system in generations, and it is up to us to stop it. Defunding the Department of Education's disability programs could lead to long-term negative effects, including a loss of federal oversight and accountability for states, which would result in inconsistent and potentially lower quality of education for disabled youth. The impact of this defunding is critical, as an incredibly large percentage of young people who are pushed out, suspended, or expelled in schools are actually students with disabilities. 24% of disabled students receive at least one in-school suspension. 29% of those students receive one or more out-of-school suspensions. And 21% of students who are disabled are also expelled. ARROS and NEA are teaching us about the need to bridge the labor, education, disability, and immigration movements. Together, we are stronger. When teachers unite with caregivers, immigrant workers, and young people impacted by criminalization, they paint a collective vision of a community that affirms everyone who lives and works in them. And we insist that holistic safety is a right for all. Our safety should take precedence before privatization or corporate interests. As local chapters of labor unions across the country unite with grassroots education justice organizing groups, they forge these bonds and build a bigger we. ARROS and NEA have done this along with other CJSF movement partners like Journey for Justice, the NYU Metro Law Center, and others. They continue to push back against privatization, school closures, vouchers, and the defunding of public schools. This is one of the most aggressive efforts to implement school vouchers and close public schools our nation has faced. And together we can push back. In December, ARROS is launching their IDEA month, and they're calling for the full funding and staffing of IDEA and the Department of Education through in-person actions, traditional and social media, and public statements from public officials. We hope you will join them and learn more at reclaimourschools.org, or you can find them at Reclaim Our SCHLS and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Our pod was produced by CJSF with the brilliant support of our co-producer Phil Circus and our organizing partners and donor members. Please like, subscribe, and share our podcast with someone else looking to support the movement of youth power and education justice. And importantly, consider making a donation to CJSF at cjsfund.org. Stay strong. See you soon.